Yamunatira vanachare Jayarada Madhava Kunja Vihare Jayarada Madhava Kunja Vihare Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhare Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhare Yashodanandana Braja Janara Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachare Yamuna Tiravanachare Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki Grantara Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki Śrīla Prabhupada ki Go Premanande Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading today from the second canto of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, chapter 6, entitled Purusha Sukta Confirmed. And today we're taking a look at text number 28. Iti sambrita sambharaha Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Tenaivaya jamishvaram Iti sambrita sambharaha Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Taneivaya jamishvaram Iti sambrita sambharaha Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Taneivaya jamishvaram Iti sambrita sambhara Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Teneva yajamishvaram Iti sambrita sambhara Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Tameva yajamishvaram Iti sambrita sambhara Purusha vayaveraham Tameva purusham yagyam Taneva yajamishvaram. Iti. Thus, sambrita, executed. Sambhara, equip myself well. Purusha, the personality of Godhead. Avayavai, by the parts and parcels. Aham, I. Tameva, unto him. Purusham, the personality of Godhead. Yagyam, the enjoyer of all sacrifices. Tena eva, by all those. Ayajam, worship. Ishvaram, the supreme controller. Thus I created the ingredients and paraphernalia for offering sacrifice out of the parts of the body of the Supreme Lord, the enjoyer of the sacrifice, and I performed the sacrifice to satisfy the Lord. Purport. People in general are always anxious to have peace of mind or peace in the world, but they do not know how to achieve such a standard of peace in the world. Such peace in the world is obtainable by performances of sacrifice and by practice of austerity. In the Bhagavad Gita, the following prescription is recommended. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyadva mam shantim richati. The karma yogis know that the Supreme Lord is the factional enjoyer and maintainer of all sacrifices and of the austere life. They also know that the Lord is the ultimate proprietor of all planets and is the factual friend of all living entities. Such knowledge gradually converts the karma yogis into pure devotees of the Lord through the association of unalloyed devotees, and thus they are able to be liberated from material bondage. Brahma, the original living being within the material world, taught us the way of sacrifice. The word sacrifice suggests dedication of one's own interest for satisfaction of a second person. That is the way of all activities. Every man is engaged in sacrificing his interests for others, either in the form of family, society, community, country, or the entire human society. But perfection of such sacrifices is attained when they are performed for the sake of the Supreme Person, the Lord. Because the Lord is the proprietor of everything, because the Lord is the friend of all living creatures, and because He is the maintainer of the performer of sacrifice, as well as the supplier of the ingredients of sacrifice, it is He only, and no one else, who should be satisfied by all sacrifices. The whole world is engaged in sacrificing energy for advancement of learning, social upliftment, economic development, and plans for total improvement of the human condition. But no one is interested in sacrificing for the sake of the Lord, as it is advised in the Bhagavad Gita. Therefore there is no peace in the world. If men at all want peace in the world, they must practice sacrifice in the interests of the Supreme Proprietor and Friend of all. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaguna Ragunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishware Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Iti sambrita sambharaha purusha vayaveraham tameva purusham yagyam tanaiva yajam ishvaram. Thus I created the ingredients and paraphernalia for offering sacrifice out of the parts of the body of the Supreme Lord, the enjoyer of the sacrifice, and I performed the sacrifice to satisfy the Lord. So we're reaching the end of the description of the Purusha Sukta, which means the creation, in one sense, of the Lord, the various elements that are organized by Lord Brahma. And we see that right at the end of the creation is created the principle of sacrifice, because that is the real meaning of the world. That is the purpose of the whole world, the purpose of all the elements, the purpose of the various senses, the purpose of the various species of life, the purpose of the various necessary ingredients and paraphernalia is all part of sacrifice. That's what it is meant for. That is why Lord Brahma was engaged to create this universe. And there's an important part of spiritual life, the distinction then between those who are devotees, or let's say those who are demigods and those who are demons, the asura and the sura, which is explained by the Bhagavad Gita to be the only two mentalities that are within this world. These two mentalities are there, the godly and the ungodly. And the distinction is not necessarily one's material desires. It's important to understand that the demigods and the demons, they can have the same desires. They desire the same thing, which is material happiness. So the desire is there for some material comfort and a specific situation within this world that will satisfy the senses. So that is okay. That desire is very natural because at the moment one is covered by the connection with the body. So one will naturally be affected by the desire to have some satisfying condition for the body and the mind. So the demigods and the demons both share this desire. But the distinction is that the demigods, they understand that ultimately this desire has to be abandoned, and ultimately that the Lord, He is the one that fulfills all desires. And that is the distinction. So the demigods, they understand that in order to fulfill my desire, I have to worship the Lord. I have to perform sacrifice for the appeasement of Krishna. And so that connection is understood. And that is then the beginning of the godly mentality. And then as one then executes his various duties in life in accordance with his desires, but all directed towards the sacrifice for the Supreme Lord, then one gradually is elevated and one is purified. Whereas those individuals that are seeking even apparently innocent things, one can have apparently pious desires, meaning that they simply want a normal, good life. They're not having necessarily, they don't want to harm anyone, or they don't want to necessarily hurt anyone or do anything bad. They just want a normal life, some sense of security and stability and happy relationships in this world. But if the Lord is not there at the center, if it is not understood, if they are simply approaching these desires without any reference to the Lord, then two things will happen. They will not be able to fulfill their desires sustainably, and also they will be degraded in the pursuit of their desires. And that is what we see gradually. Many there are many normal pious people, but then at a certain point one's principles will be challenged in the pursuit of one's desires. And then we see so many people, at a certain point they go down because they have lost that connection with the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada says here, it's very important to understand that this principle of sacrifice, he says, it suggests dedication of one's own interest for the satisfaction of a second person. So that is the idea, is that to understand that our own desires can be fulfilled by satisfying another person. And that is the crux of the matter, very fast. And Prabhupada says here that is the way of all activities, is like that. It's not just the devotee sacrifices. Everybody is sacrificing. But you just choose who will you sacrifice for. You sacrifice either, as it says, for your family, for your society, for your community, for your country, or even for the entire humanity, or for planet Earth. We see many people now that are into sacrificing for planet Earth. But you're all performing your sacrifice. You are dedicating your energy and your time to fulfillment of the desires of another. And that is the way of human life. At the lowest rung of that entire spectrum is those who are trying to satisfy the desires of their body. But even that is also, they're working for something else. They're working for the satisfaction, and they work very hard, and they have to do so many things. So it depends on one's identification. It is interesting if you look, for example, at the idea of everyone is trying to get you to identify with them, because then you are willing to sacrifice for them. If you look, for example, at nationalism is relatively new. The idea of countries, it's not very old. It only came about after really the World War I and then really World War II. Before then there was kingdoms, so then there was created the state of Belarus, or the Republic of South Africa, or what's India is a republic also? The Republic of India, or there is the United States of America. So all these ideas, and then on the basis of these ideas they convince people, now you have to, what is the highest thing you can do with your life? To sacrifice it for your country. Amazing. And on that principle they could get people to do so many things. Imagine that. Go to some place to fight for your life, in the sense of fighting for your country. And the idea is that in fighting for your country, then you will find some kind of happiness. So they channel. Even communism, that was very interesting, because in communism they basically just created the state as a religion. So they would go in communist times, the Communist Party, they would go when there was a famine, when people were hungry, they would go with big trucks to deliver bread. And then they would tell the people, see, we are giving you bread, not God. So it's not that God is supplying you food, the Communist Party is supplying you food. So therefore, don't worship God, but worship the party. So all these things are suggesting, that's Prabhupada's way of saying that everybody is just performing the same thing. Everybody is sacrificing and serving some greater interest than themselves. And therefore, the Brahmana is that individual who is broad-minded enough to understand who is the real recipient, where is the real intelligent person to try to appease by your sacrifice. The Brahmana means, the Sanskrit root bri means broad or big or vast or expansive. So the Brahmana is explained to be broad-minded, a broad-minded individual. And then the opposite of the Brahmana, Krishna explains, is the Kripana. The Kripana is then explained, Prabhupada translated as a miser. But it also means a person with a very tiny, his consciousness is very narrow. He's not able to see the bigger picture, he just sees something very small. So we see animals, for example, very narrow consciousness. They cannot understand, an animal cannot even understand whether it is American or Indian. It doesn't matter. They're not even able to conceive of these ideas. So in human society, one has the potential to become a Brahmana, but that potential can only become fully developed if one understands that yes, behind everything, behind my society, my community, my country, humanity, or the earth, above all these ideas, there is a Supreme Lord, who is the one that is actually the proper recipient of my sacrifice. But it takes it's not so easy to come to that point. The point of development is very rare. And it's at that point that one would say, becomes a devotee. That's what it means. One becomes broad-minded to the point of understanding that Krishna is the recipient of sacrifice, the controller of everything, and also the friend of all. And it is very clear that Prabhupada says here also that there is an intimate connection between sacrifice and peace. As Krishna explains, that only that individual who understands that I am the recipient of all sacrifice, they are able to obtain peace. Because the problem is, if you will sacrifice for these other things, one will not attain peace. Because there will be disappointment and regret. You see in many countries now, like my parents, in their generation, same as in America, I guess, they had to fight a war, fight wars for the country. And then they were fed all this nationalistic propaganda, explaining to them how they now have to sacrifice their life for their country. They were all young kids, imagine you're 19, 20, and then you get swept up in all this propaganda, and then you go to fight for your country. But then when they go there, they realize what it means. Very ugly, very brutal. And then many years later, you realize that ultimately you were sent to fight for your country, but actually you were just sent to fight for other people's commercial interests. All these wars, they're simply fought for money. Like we see now, arguably one could say, why is it that there's so much involvement in the Middle East? Is it because of democracy? Or is it because of some kind of higher idealistic principle? No. It is because of oil. So many people go to sacrifice their life, but ultimately it is about money. So that is very disappointing. And you can read many soldiers and people, they would oftentimes say that they become very unhappy when they realize how they've been manipulated by governments. Now, I will not necessarily say that it's only that, but it oftentimes happens like that people get sent to war, but they're actually not really fighting for an elevated principle. And then one becomes very unhappy then. Same thing for your family. One can sacrifice his whole life simply for his family, but then at the end, as you become old and decrepit, and then you see that actually you can easily also become abandoned by your family. Not always, but it can happen. It happens. So therefore, peace is not to be found in making one's ultimate sacrifice towards these smaller sections of humanity. Even if you sacrifice for the earth, it's not going to bring you ultimate peace. Peace can only be found if one is sacrificing for Krishna, because Krishna is the only individual that is able to really reciprocate with our sacrifice. If you give yourself to something, you need to get something in return, isn't it? Otherwise we become a little bitter if you give so much and you just get nothing in return. So Krishna is the only individual that can really reciprocate with that sacrifice of what we can give. And we find a very nice verse. So now the question is, how is it then to sacrifice to Krishna? How is it? What is it that we should do? Is it very difficult? Is it very painful? Actually not. There's a very nice verse in the 3rd canto of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Then there's a description of the demigods offering their prayers to Lord Vishnu. See if I can find it here. And in there they're describing how the purpose of creation. These are the demigods who are behind creation, and they know what is the purpose of the world. And they explain how those individuals that are too much covered by the material energy, they cannot understand that the Lord is within their hearts. But those individuals, and this is a very nice verse, so this is 3:5-46. Panena te deva kata sudhaya pravriddha bhaktya vishadashayaye vairagya saram pratilabhya bodham yatanjasan viyur akunta dishnam. O Lord, persons who, because of their serious attitude, attain the stage of enlightened devotional service, achieve the complete meaning of renunciation and knowledge, and attain the Vaikuntha Loka in the spiritual sky, simply by drinking the nectar of your topics. Very nice. So, panena te deva kata sudhaya. So simply by drinking the nectar of the topics of the Lord. That is the actual sacrifice that is required. So it is not very complicated. Sometimes we hear sacrifice and it sounds very painful or very difficult, but it is not. In fact, it is very simple. If one understands the process, one simply has to hear about Krishna. That is all that is really required. In one sense, we can see that the Lord is simply requesting our attention. That is all that is required. And if you think about all your relationships within the world, in this world, they work on the same principle. That is about attention. They did some interesting studies. Most people divorce for many reasons. If you would go into it many times, there's so many other reasons that are there. There could be financial difficulties, there could be abuse, whatever. So many different things are there. But the one thing that is common in all divorce, that it is preceded by people that feel they are not receiving any attention from the other individual. So that is where relationships stop. That is the first death, the sign of any kind of relationship, whether it's friendship or romance, whatever it is. If there is no attention, if one does not pay attention to each other, if you don't give another person time, then what is the meaning of that relationship? Then all these other things become irrelevant. Even if you give them money. You will see also with children in general who end up in troubled situations. Again, the one common factor that they all share is that they've suffered some form of neglect. Even they can be living in rich houses and receiving lots of money from their parents and lots of facilities, and they can get so many things and get a good education, all these things are there. But if they don't get attention, then it doesn't work. Then there will be something lacking in that relationship. So attention is the most difficult thing, and there's no substitute for it. You cannot pay money, you cannot do work, there's no substitute that can be there for attention. So similarly, in the process of trying to satisfy Krishna, that is all that is required, but there's also no substitute. There's no substitute. That is the interesting point. You can give Krishna all your money, that's fine. But if you're never going to pay attention to his topics, then you will, until you do that, you cannot substitute that. Even if you give him $1 billion, but you say, I will give you $1 billion, but I'm not willing to give you any attention. Can I still go back to Godhead? Then Krishna will say, no. No. Because the basic principle of any relationship is attention. One has to give that attention to Krishna. And that is really at that point when one encounters, that is our approach also in studying scripture. It's not really so much about how much we can understand. Interesting. It is important, if one is very intelligent, it is important to really try to study scripture properly, because then it becomes more interesting and then it is easier to keep sustained attention. But really, we see that the perfection of devotional study is then encapsulated when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu met the illiterate Brahmana. He met a Brahmana, this was in South India, I believe. And he met a Brahmana who was chanting the Bhagavad Gita. So yes, we recently had the appearance there of the Bhagavad Gita. So this Brahmana was chanting the Bhagavad Gita, but it was very badly done. It was clear that he was not actually literate in Sanskrit. He didn't actually know, you could clearly hear that he was not properly pronouncing anything, which meant that also he couldn't understand it. If you can't even pronounce it properly, what to speak of understanding it? And everybody was making fun of him. There was this strange guy who was chanting every day, but he doesn't even understand what he's saying. He's not even literate. So it was very funny. It's like sometimes you can hear people sing, but they can't really sing. It's very interesting. You can hear they're tone deaf, and it's interesting why they're singing, because they can't really sing. But then we see that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he went to this Brahmana, he was very intrigued. And he was wondering, what is he doing? So then he went to him and asked him, what are you doing, sir? He says that he is chanting. And the Brahmana said, I'm chanting this Bhagavad Gita, but I'm not actually literate. But Lord Chaitanya could see that this Brahmana was actually crying. And he asked him, why are you chanting this? If you're not literate, what is the point of chanting this Bhagavad Gita? And then he says, what can I say? My spiritual master, he told me to do this. He gave me this instruction, so I'm simply trying to follow to the best of my ability. even though I'm not actually able to do it. And then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, but why is it if you're not understanding anything, why are you crying? I can see that you are somehow very much absorbed in the Bhagavad Gita. And then the man said, well, when I am chanting this Bhagavad Gita, even though I do not understand much, I don't understand the Sanskrit, but as I am chanting this, I am remembering Krishna instructing Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And I'm thinking how kind Krishna is to his devotee, how much attention he is giving to his devotee, and how much he is trying his best to give his devotee good guidance in order to come back and do the proper action. And just by thinking how affectionate Krishna is to Arjuna, the tears come to my eyes, and I'm overcome by gratitude for the Lord. And then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu proclaimed that this person's study of the Bhagavad Gita is perfect, because he has understood the actual point of it. So similarly, when we approach our devotional literature, there's also sometimes an element of that. We are not really, it is about giving attention to Krishna. So we understand that the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the literary incarnation of God. So that is also our approach. We're just giving our attention to Krishna. And out of that, whatever we understand, that we understand. But that basic principle is then, that's why bhakti is at the root. Now we have in our society greatly learned people that have somehow been blessed by Krishna. I mean, people that are, who of us is competent in Sanskrit? We chant it every day, but we don't even understand it. It's very interesting. But then there are some devotees who are, who can speak Sanskrit and do all these kind of things and be greatly graced by Krishna. Krishna greatly blessed them with some amazing insights. But even these devotees, if you would sit and speak with them, then you would see at the root there is that simple approach, just trying to please Krishna. Just like we have kirtaniyas who are very wonderful singers, blessed with great musical ability. But the success of their kirtan depends on something else. But at the same time, one should also not, out of a sense of laziness, neglect proper study. Because then that means your attitude is also inefficient. What that illiterate Brahmana shared with someone like Rupa Goswami, who was amazingly intelligent, literate not just in Sanskrit and Hindi, but also in Persian and Arabic, I guess also must be Arabic as well. So what a great learned scholar. But what do they share? Both of them shared that they were trying their best with whatever ability Krishna had given them. Krishna has bestowed Rupa Goswami with amazing ability, and he had bestowed this Brahmana with, in comparison, much less ability. But both of them were trying to do the best that they could with the ability that they had. So therefore, in our society, we should be careful not to use this as an excuse to not properly execute our duties. Then one is also actually misusing the principle. And then your studies will also not be effective, because it is clear that you are not adequately applying whatever you have received. So therefore, be careful. We see Srila Prabhupada accepted everyone's offering, but at the same time, from some people, he accepted different results. Even there's one, sometimes we see that Prabhupada would be very pushy with book distributors, pushing them to double. They said, double your results. But then once one person wrote a letter, and they're saying, yes, but some people are going out, but they can't distribute anything. And then Prabhupada said, oh, no, that's not a problem. He says, even if you go out and you just try and you don't distribute a single piece of literature, still you will please me. So very interesting, that it is about the attitude. But at the same time, the results are also important. So then the demigods continue their prayers. So they say that simply this is the sacrifice. Simply by panena te deva katha sudaya, simply by drinking the nectar of the topics of Krishna, hearing about Krishna, one can actually please Krishna. And then, listen to this one. Tatapare chatma samadhi yoga palena jidva prakritim balishtam tvam eva dhira purusham vishanti te shamshramasyan natu seva yate. It's the next verse. Then we got to say, others who are pacified by means of transcendental self-realization and have conquered over the modes of nature by dint of strong power and knowledge, also enter into you. But for them, there is much pain, whereas the devotee simply discharges devotional service and thus feels no such pain. So the distinction, the differentiation, here he is speaking about those who try to conquer over the influence of matter. Balena jitva prakritim balishtam. So by their own strength, they try to conquer over Prakriti, which is very powerful. Those individuals might attain some success, but it is very painful process. And why would you do that? Why would you do something painful if you can get to the same world very easy? So therefore we see that is the unique position of devotional service, that if one has adequate faith in hearing about Krishna, then things become very easy. And then also you have the ability to concentrate your efforts, because you have to choose what kind of sacrifice you want to make, you know. And all sacrifices, they require some time and energy, and you only have so much time and energy. So therefore, choose wisely, because depending on the means that you choose, you will have different layers of success. And that is the unique understanding of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam and the unique understanding of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that is given to us, that actually it is not very complicated. But one will still get results according to the level of one's focus. But it doesn't have to be painful. And one simply has to have that faith, and hearing and chanting is there. And now you might say, but I have no taste. But then you should chant and hear with those individuals who do. That's the trick. Somehow by coming together and doing it together, it becomes easier. And then there is some communal enthusiasm that propels us forward. So that is the basic principle of sacrifice. And also to understand that in addition to the principle of hearing and chanting about Krishna, which is the Bhagavad Marg, there is the practice of deity worship, or the Pancharatrika Vidhi, which is given to help purify the mind in order to make the process more powerful. Because by improperly conducting our affairs within this world, the mind becomes severely disturbed by passion and ignorance. And then it becomes very difficult, it becomes an obstacle towards taking shelter of the simple process of hearing and chanting. So therefore, one should also not neglect the supportive activities that are there in the process of devotional service in order to help one keep a clear mind and think that, no, I don't, this seems too much effort. I don't want to do this. I will simply chant. One has to be careful, because we see that one has to act, one has to know one's own position. And so much suffering and difficulty can be avoided by simply understanding one's own position. And if you do not have a proper understanding of your own position, then things will be very difficult. And how do you understand what is your position? The spiritual master explains to you what is your position. By self-designating yourself, you will get into a lot of issues. So in that way, Krishna consciousness is very nice, that by surrendering to a spiritual master, he can assess what it is exactly that we need to do in order to move forward in our spiritual life. And then by simply executing his desires, then one will be properly situated and have a combination of supportive activities that help purify the consciousness and keep it pure, and then use that purity and that space within the consciousness to hear and chant about Krishna. And in that way, one became saved. And and that is the nice version even of the Bhagavatam in the 6th canto, in the Bhagavad Gita itself. One is again and again assured that even if there is big trouble, even if one gets into a lot of trouble by the force of previous samskaras, someone engages in activities that are very unfavorable for devotional service, all that you do then is you return to the process. Very interesting. That is there. So our process is very interesting. It is on the one hand very simple, but very strict. Very strict. But at the same hand, actually very open and very liberal. Because there's one qualification that is required to engage in this process. Without that qualification, nothing will help you. No other person can help you, and nothing can help you. But that qualification is simply that one has to have the desire to engage in the process, which is very simple. But without it, nothing will work. So very interesting, both ways. Very strict, but then very easy. And one has to simply keep that connection with the desire to perform devotional service and the desire to hear and chant about Krishna. And then somehow or other, things will move in the proper direction. Okay, let us hear if there are any questions or any comments on anything that has been said today or anything that you feel relevant. Yes, Ananda Kirtan too.
I like the last point where you're saying, talking about desire. That's all we really have is desire, whether we desire Maya or desire Krishna. And at least in myself, there's that concept of if you don't have the desire, then you can at least desire the desire. And even if you don't have that, at least you can desire the desire to.
The desire, yeah.
I've actually seen that within myself sometimes, that I have to do that desire to desire. To surrender and become completely pure. So, can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, exactly that. That's she's saying, at the root, that is the only thing we can do. And therefore, there's one purport in the 7th canto that explains that Prahlad Maharaj, he was fully transcendental, but he kept himself on the transcendental platform by transcendental intelligence. Yeah? So we see that the trick is one should just somehow stay engaged in devotional service. Because if one is performing devotional service, that is if you say that I have a desire for devotional service, that desire has to lead to devotional service. For example, Prabhupada, he translated the term bhakti not as devotion. Most other people translated it as devotion, the path of devotion. But Prabhupada's like, no, bhakti means devotional service. So he added this practical element to it, so to keep you from getting so mental. Because otherwise, if you would ask yourself, do I have devotion or not? Who knows? Yeah? If you look at a person also, who knows who has devotion and who doesn't have devotion? But if you ask, is someone performing devotional service, it becomes very simple, becomes clear who is actually engaged. And that is how you will know. That is how you will know what is actually happening within the heart. And Jesus said the same thing, isn't it? That from whatever the heart is full of, it will pour out of the mouth. So you judge the heart by what is actually happening. So then, by transcendental intelligence means we find a variety of activities that can engage us in Krishna consciousness. And that is a way in which the moment that we say, oh no, I can't do this service, I just somehow, the mind it's finished, it's too difficult, somehow I can't do it. Well, then there's also always something else. And in that way one can also always stay in contact with that desire. So even if I don't have the desire for this thing, at least something else is there. There's always a way in which we can manifest our desire for devotional service. And that is the way in which one stays fully transcendental. And if one ever comes to the point, that's why Prabhupada says, our devotional, our society is very interesting because if you look at traditional renunciates in other sampradayas, very tight, a very tight circle of activities that one can perform in Mayavadi sampradayas or in Buddhist sampradayas, especially if you wear the orange cloth, it's tight, there's a very few things you can do. But then in our sampradaya, for example, there's much more scope, even you can cook. Sometimes sannyasis, these Vedic sannyasis, they were not allowed to cook, not allowed to use any fire. But then if you want to cook for Krishna, no problem. So we see that element of where you sometimes run into the fact that you don't have any desire. Oftentimes it means that there's a specific activity that you just can't do it. Like a specific service, like as a book distributor, for example. At a certain point, you just can't, you hit a wall and your motivation is gone and you just can't do it. And at that time, then one has to take shelter then of auxiliary activities that help one. Like then there's hearing, there's chanting, there's cooking, whatever, there's other things that can then balance us out. So that is also a part of desiring the desire, is to be intelligent enough to create enough variety in one's spiritual life so that one can always stay safe and well situated. Because if one makes it too tight, too soon, then at a certain point it can just become too difficult. It just becomes too difficult because it's too narrow. But it doesn't have to be. So that's another point, an interesting feature of also desiring the desire and making sure there's enough variety of spiritual activity to keep us, to give us some nice options for engaging in Krishna service. Any other comments or questions? Vraj Mohan Prabhu. Yeah. 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 Yeah, it is really more complicated, unfortunately. What to do. But even for the complicated, there's still hope. Anything else? Divyangi Mataji?
Well, it seems because why Krishna sometimes doesn't fulfill our desires.
Acha.
I heard this first, deserve and desire. What does it mean to deserve? And what to do to deserve?
Yes, well, that is a fact that Krishna doesn't fulfill all desires. Sometimes he doesn't fulfill it immediately. That is also the reality. But sometimes there is some time that separates us between the fulfillment of our desires. And sometimes he also doesn't fulfill something exactly as we want. But we have to have some faith. Therefore, the first principle in approaching Krishna is patience, is enthusiasm. And then the second one that is required is some patience. Utsaha nishchayat dhairyat. So, enthusiasm, confidence and patience, these things, there are three things that have to be together. If there's just one and not the others, that doesn't work. If one is extremely enthusiastic, but there is no patience and no confidence, then one's enthusiasm will falter. Therefore, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur calls it utsaha maihi. So, false enthusiasm, because it is not tempered by a certain sense of patience. If there is not confidence, then one's enthusiasm will waver, and it also will be very difficult to be patient. Because you can be patient if you have confidence, then one can be patient. So all these three things, they go together very well. So in the fulfillment of desires, one has to have some faith that when the time is right, Krishna will give what is required. So when we speak about approaching Krishna for the fulfillment of desires, that is how we lay it at his feet, as they say. We just say, Krishna, you know what is in my heart. And at a certain point of time, I'm sure that you will provide what it is that I require. And in order to fulfill this desire, I will continue serving you. But we have to understand that this is a very, very important thing to understand. That the fulfillment of our desire is not necessarily going to be reflective of our spiritual advancement. You see? There's a certain kind of gospel that is preached that one calls the prosperity gospel, meaning that you judge the extent by which you are favored by Krishna to the extent that you are given material facility. So it's very dangerous. Many churches like that, they say that, God's mercy means you will get money. And then they say, well, that's how you judge. Is this person holy or not? And you say, well, does he have a lot of money? So that goes for all kinds of desires that there can be. So that is not our approach. Our approach is that Krishna will give me exactly what I need. He will fulfill my desire by whatever it is. And we can see sometimes someone that is apparently less advanced, and they could have seemingly more material facility than someone who is more advanced. Because Krishna is the one that decides how the desires will be fulfilled. So that is very important, that one has to understand that connection. But the idea is that one has to have faith, specifically for those who are executing the process of pure devotional service, that Krishna will give me everything, exactly what I need, that is best for my devotional service. And whatever the desire is, He will give me the right amount of money, the right amount of health, the right relationships, entrenched, whatever it is required. He will provide that. And it will be different for different people, because Krishna makes individual solutions. So that faith has to be there. And then one can execute it patiently. But at the same time, that is the general principle. But then there's also the principle of deserving that sometimes becomes practical, meaning that, for example, if a brahmachari, if it comes to that time, say when one shifts ashrams, then you have to also start taking practical responsibility for what that means. Meaning then one has to make some preparations for this is the desire that I want to engage in. If one moves into a temple, then one also has to understand, okay, now I have to make practice. So one has to always make some practical preparations for what it is that one, as for one's own state of life. So one has to also take personal responsibility for whatever it is. There's that element of taking personal responsibility for the various stages of life, for the various desires. Like for example, if you desire to have a child, like Prabhupada would use that example, how one has to be patient. If one gets married and one wants children, just be patient, it will come at a certain point. But then also, it would be good, one has to start preparing for the reality of what it means to be a mother. Or if you take sannyas, you have a desire to take sannyas, then you have to think very carefully about what it means to be a sannyasi. And then you have to prepare by developing the qualities that is required of being a sannyasi. So therefore, any desire that we have, it means that we enter into a certain kind of relationship. You have a certain kind of identity. And that is how you will be situated. As a mother, as a father, a husband, a wife, a sannyasi, a renunciate, a teacher, a leader, whatever it is that you desire. All desires are related with a certain position that one takes. So then how you deserve is by cultivating the specific qualities that are connected to that identity. Because until you start developing those qualities, how can you expect a desire to be fulfilled? So therefore one has to have a clear understanding of what it means. If I tell Krishna, I want to have a wife, then you have to understand, then you have to become a husband. Then you have to think about what it means to be a husband. And you have to be ready to fulfill those qualities. If you tell Krishna, I want to be celibate my whole life, I want to be a brahmachari my whole life, then you have to think, what does that mean? What will that mean? What will that require of me? So you first have to pay. You have to be willing to pay the price for whatever it is that you're asking of Krishna. And that is what it means to deserve. So one has to carefully think about that. Because the fulfillment of any desire within this world means fulfilling any kind of, you're taking some kind of a position. It will come at a price. So we see the heart's desire of, say even people who want money. If you want money, you have to be ready for what it means to have money. Like now, if you're a brahmachari, it's very easy because you don't have any money. So it means there's so many things you don't have to think about. And you also don't have to give charity. Very easy. But imagine once you get money, then immediately, then it enters in. Now you have to decide, how much will I give in charity and how much will I keep? So very interesting. And that everybody who works, we know, you work so hard for that money, and then it's there. And then now you have to have the strength of character to give in charity. So if you ask Krishna for money, you have to be willing to give charity. If you say, I want a child, wonderful. Most women, they would like a child. But to have a child, that's serious work. It's not a joke, It requires a lot of time and energy. So in this way, one has to always think in terms of deserve, meaning I must be willing to do what is required. And one has to be open also to understand that oftentimes we don't really know what it means. You see, sometimes brahmacharis, they shift into household life, but they still try to maintain to the privileges that are there for the brahmachari ashram, even when they enter into household life. And they cause a lot of complications for themselves and for their spouse. Very unfair. You cannot hold on to the privileges of what it means to be a brahmachari. You see, for example, one of the privileges in brahmachari life, to a certain extent, is that you don't have to be disturbed by other people's material issues, to a certain extent, unless you enter into temple management. But until then, if it is a brahmachari, the idea is that you perform your service and then people should leave you alone. You should be left alone so that you have time and energy to perform your sadhana, because that's what's required to maintain your position as a brahmachari. But at the same time, it is your privilege as a brahmachari. You don't have to work for money because you have sacrificed your personal wealth, and therefore you are given the privilege of being able to hear and chant and engage in studies that are not financially motivated. But if you then decide to marry one day, then you have to understand that now that you cannot just demand that right to have time for your spiritual life. If you want time for your spiritual life, you have to sort out the responsibilities of what it means, which doesn't just mean money, but it also means time and energy that now has to go to your wife and children. You cannot now just maintain this mood of thinking, I'm not going to give these people time, and it's not my responsibility. It is your responsibility. So that's an example of someone trying to hold on to the privileges of a previous life. So similarly, if one wants to get married to whatever it is, one has to know what it really means. It is not a joke. You see, for example, Sri Dharma is explained, what it means to be a wife. It's not an easy thing. It's not so simple. It goes both ways. Nothing is easy. Wife, husband, brahmachari, sannyasi, there's no easy position. Parent, child, there's no easy position in this world. So in that way, to be fully sober in understanding what are the requirements of this position, and in starting to cultivate the qualities and the attitude that is required of that position, even before one is necessarily fit to receive it. So therefore, brahmacharis, for example, if you want to get married, you don't just the next day, you say, okay, it's done, I want to get married. And then the next day you call someone and then you get married the day after that. No, it's like generally there's then a whole period of process. You change your cloth, you start preparing, you might even have to start to raise a little money. You have to start preparing for the responsibilities of what the ashram will take. So similarly, when we prepare for the fulfillment of a desire, we have to start entering a process of preparation for what that would mean. And for now the next question is, how do I know what it means? Scripture and senior individuals. We have to ask them. It's a very nice question to ask someone. If you want to ask someone a question, you go to someone, say if you want to be a sannyasi one day, you have to go to a sannyasi and you ask him, what will it take of me to be a sannyasi? Because that sannyasi will be able to tell you. If you want to get married, you have to go to someone who is married. You have to ask him, what will it take of me to actually be a proper grihasta? Please tell me, what is it that I have to do? So in that way, deserve. One have to deserve and then desire. And to see that Krishna will fulfill our desires according to our capacity to deserve. So that is the difference. And just as a final point, the killer of the fulfillment of any desire and the killer of the reciprocation in any relationship, whether it is with other people or with Krishna, is the sense of entitlement. The sense of thinking that I am entitled to a specific result. That kills it. Krishna explains that you are entitled to the performance of your duties. Karma nyevadikaraste, ma palesu kadachena, ma te sangostva karmani. What's the last one? Brahmacharis. So, Krishna says that you are entitled to perform your duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits of your activity. So that entitlement, the thinking I'm entitled to a specific result, that will cause complications also in this understanding, because then one is not in proper knowledge. So therefore, so a few points that come together. Okay, now we are all entitled to taking breakfast because we have sat through the morning program, we have performed a devotional service, and now Krishna will bestow upon us the results of that sacrifice. So I don't want to delay the process any longer. Grantarash Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanande.